That's one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind.
Chills every time, right?
Every single time. Those words, Neil Armstrong's words from the moon, July 20th, 1969, they didn't just echo there, did they? They resonated everywhere, across the whole planet, really.
Absolutely. They became part of our collective memory, instantly recognizable. It was this symbol, this single moment that kind of shifted our whole perspective on what humans could actually do.
Fulfilling a dream, like as old as humanity itself, looking up at the moon. But that moment, that step, it wasn't just Armstrong, was it? It was the tip of this colossal iceberg.
Exactly. Behind it was Project Apollo, this huge, decade-long American effort. Just incredible national undertaking to put people on the moon and bring them back safely.
Yeah, the sheer scale is mind-boggling. Human ingenuity, scientific ambition, just pure grit, really, on a level never seen before.
Mm-hmm.
And today, on the Deep Dive, that's exactly what we're getting into. We're going to give you the complete journey through Project Apollo. We've been digging through a mountain of material.
Yeah, some really fascinating stuff. Things like, detailed statistical references, Apollo by the numbers it's called, that really bring the drama of the numbers, as they say, to life.
Right, and the broader NASA history series, giving that bigger picture, the context, plus some really specific works on, like, the rockets themselves, the spacecraft.
Stages to Saturn, chariots for Apollo.
Mm.
They really get into the nuts and bolts, the hardware, but also the human stories behind it all.
So our mission today is to give you that complete nuanced picture. We're talking the whole life cycle, roughly 1962 to 1972. Think of this as your shortcut to really grasping one of humanity's absolute greatest achievements.
We'll be looking at, where it all started, the motivations, the Cold War backdrop.
Yeah.
Then we'll trace the timeline, the missions themselves, the triumphs, yes, but also the tragedies.
And finally, we'll look at the end of the program and its incredible legacy. What did it leave us with? Science, technology, culture. It touched everything.
Absolutely. You'll get a real sense of the political drive, the scientific questions, the sheer engineering brilliance that made it happen, and honestly, lessons that still resonate today.
Exactly. So this isn't just looking back. It's about understanding the scale of that challenge and maybe finding some inspiration in how they overcame it. Ready to unpack the story of Apollo?
Let's do it.
Okay, so let's kick things off right at the beginning. The origins of Apollo. To really get it, you have to picture the world back then, right? Post-Sputnik.
Oh, absolutely crucial. This is deep Cold War territory. The U.S. versus the Soviet Union. It wasn't just politics. It was this intense ideological battle playing out on a global stage.
And space. Space became the new front line, didn't it? A very visible one.
Hugely visible. When the Soviets launched Sputnik 1 in 1957, it wasn't just a beeping satellite. It was a shockwave. It sent ripples of anxiety through the U.S.
Like, wow, they can do that.
Exactly. It demonstrated a technological capability that, frankly, scared people. It really ignited the space race. And you see this in the historical accounts, like the NASA History Series books focusing on the Soviet side of the race. It wasn't just about exploration. It was about prestige, national security, proving your system was superior.
And for a while there, the Soviets were clearly winning, weren't they?
Oh, undeniably. First satellite, Sputnik. First animal in orbit, Laika. Then the big one, first human in space, Yuri Gagarin in 1961. Each one was a major propaganda victory for them and, frankly, a blow to American confidence.
So the U.S. felt like it was falling behind.
Seriously behind. There was this palpable sense of urgency. We had to catch up. We had to demonstrate American capability. It became about achieving, quote, preeminence in space. Not just parity, preeminence. It was tied directly to national strength, tech leadership, the whole package.
Which leads us straight to the White House, right?
Yeah.
To President Kennedy.
Directly. That urgency went right to the top. Now, our sources focus more on the program's official goals once established, but the timing. Apollo's start in '62, and that explicit goal of achieving preeminence, it all points back to Kennedy's challenge, his famous speech in '61, aiming for the moon before the decade was out.
Even if not explicitly quoted as the program's goal list, it was the political spark.
Absolutely. It was the galvanizing moment, this immense act of political will. It focused the nation's attention and, crucially, its resources. It made the moon mission not just a NASA project, but a national imperative, a demonstration of American resolve.
So the public saw a race to the moon, beat the Soviets, plant the flag. But you're saying NASA's internal goals, the official ones, were broader than just that single landing.
That's a really important point. Yes, landing Americans on the moon and returning them safely to Earth was the headline. It was the incredibly bold, almost unbelievable goal that grabbed everyone's imagination.
The thing Kennedy promised.
the thing Kennedy promised. But for NASA, it was actually just one piece, albeit the most visible piece, of a much bigger strategic picture.
Okay, so what else was on their checklist beyond just getting footprints in the dust?
Well, a huge one was establishing the technology to meet other national interests in space. This wasn't just about building one-off moon rockets.
So building capability for the future.
Exactly. It was about creating a whole technological foundation, pushing the absolute limits in rocketry, in navigation systems, life support, materials that could withstand extreme environments, computing, all of it. The idea was once you develop this tech, it doesn't just disappear after Apollo. It becomes the toolkit for whatever comes next: defense applications, communication satellites, future exploration.
Building the infrastructure, essentially. Makes sense. And presumably there was a big science component, too. It wasn't just an engineering challenge.
Oh, definitely. Another key objective was carrying out a program of scientific exploration of the moon. This was serious science. They planned detailed geological surveys, collecting hundreds of kilograms of lunar rocks and soil,
The moon rocks, yeah.
deploying instruments on the surface, seismometers, magnetometers, things to study the lunar environment, the solar wind. The goal was to understand the moon's origin, its history, and through that, learn more about Earth and the solar system. It was about turning the moon into a natural laboratory.
Okay, technology, science, what else?
The human factor. A third major goal was developing human capability to work in the lunar environment. This is totally uncharted territory.
Figuring out how people could actually live and work up there, even for a short time?
Precisely. Designing spacesuits that could protect astronauts from vacuum, radiation, those wild temperature swings. Developing ways to move around eventually, the lunar rover. Perfecting communications over 250,000 miles. Training astronauts for complex tasks for emergencies. It was about proving humans could function effectively off Earth, preparing for potentially longer stays or missions further out.
That human capability piece, though, it hinged on some massive engineering breakthroughs right at the start. You mentioned one critical decision in 1962, choosing Lunar Orbit Rendezvous, or LOR. Can you unpack that a bit? Why was that such a big deal?
LORAR.
Yeah.
Yes, that was a huge decision, and honestly, a bit of a gamble. Before you build anything, you have to decide how you're going to do the mission. There were other ideas, like direct ascent, building one monster rocket to launch a single craft that lands on the moon and comes back.
Sounds simpler, maybe?
Simpler in concept, maybe, but the rocket required would have been unbelievably massive, possibly beyond what they could build in time. LOR was different. It meant breaking the mission into modules.
Okay.
You'd have the main spacecraft, the command and service module, the CSM, orbit the moon. Then a smaller dedicated landing craft, the lunar module, or LM, would detach, fly down to the surface, do its thing, and then this is the crucial part, fly back up into lunar orbit to rendezvous and dock with the waiting CSM.
Rendezvous and docking. 240,000 miles from home. That sounds tricky.
Understatement of the century. It was incredibly complex. People like John Houbolt really championed the idea, arguing it was lighter, cheaper, and faster to develop because you didn't need that one gigantic lander return vehicle. But relying on that orbital link-up, it demanded incredible precision. It was the key that unlocked the whole mission within the time frame. But it was a bold choice.
Making space itself the staging ground. Wow. Okay, so LRItis. Now you need the rockets to get these modules off Earth.
Right, and that meant the Saturn family of rockets. Two main players here. First, the Saturn IB.
What was its job?
The Saturn IB was used mainly for Earth orbit missions, testing the Apollo command and service modules, flying the early crewed missions like Apollo 7. It was a powerful rocket based on earlier designs, but not powerful enough for the full moon mission.
For that, you needed the big one.
You needed the Saturn V. And this thing was, and still is, legendary. An absolute triumph of engineering. 3 stages standing taller than the Statue of Liberty, generating a staggering 7.5 million pounds of thrust at liftoff.
Just incredible numbers.
Absolutely necessary, though, to hurl the fully loaded Apollo spacecraft CSM and LM, plus fuel out of Earth's gravity and send it on its way to the moon. There are entire books just on developing this rocket, the challenges they overcame.
I bet. And the spacecraft perched on top of this beast. It was also modular, following that LR concept. 3 main parts.
Exactly. Tailored for the mission. First, you have the command module, the CM. Think of it as a cruise home and cockpit for the trip. Cone-shaped.
Where the astronauts lived.
Yep. Pressurized section, seats for 3, flight controls, navigation, communications, life support for the journey there and back. Crucially, this is the only part designed to survive re-entry through Earth's atmosphere and splash down in the ocean.
Okay, the return capsule.
Right. Attached behind it was the service module, the SM. This was the powerhouse. A big cylinder packed with the main engine for big maneuvers in space, like getting into lunar orbit, and importantly, firing to come home.
And all the supplies.
And all the supplies, fuel, oxygen, water, power systems, radiators. It was unpressurized, basically the support section for the CM. Together, the CM and SM were called the CSM. That was the mothership, essentially.
Got it. And the third piece, the star of the landing.
The lunar module,
Mm.
the LM, or LEM, as it was often called back then. This was the dedicated lander, a completely unique vehicle designed only to fly in the vacuum of space and land in the moon's low gravity.
So it looked weird.
It looked famously weird.
Yeah.
All angular, covered in gold foil, spindly legs. No need for aerodynamics because it never flew in atmosphere. It had 2 stages, a descent stage with the landing gear and the engine to slow it down for landing, and an ascent stage on top with its own engine to lift the crew back up to orbit to meet the CSM.
2 astronauts went down in the LM, 1 stayed in the CSM.
That was the plan. 2 down, 1 orbiting overhead. The design, the engineering that went into making these 3 distinct vehicles work together flawlessly. It's just staggering when you dig into the details, like in those Chariots for Apollo accounts. Every piece had a critical role in this incredibly complex space ballet.
Okay, so the vision was set, the LOR strategy chosen, the incredible machines Saturn V, CSM, LM were designed. Now, how did they actually make it happen? How did they go from blueprints to footprints on the moon? Let's walk through the timeline, starting with those early, uncrewed test flights.
Right, because they didn't just strap astronauts onto the first Saturn V and light the fuse. That would have been insane.
Yeah.
There's a very methodical, step-by-step process. These uncrewed missions, roughly from 62 up to 68, were absolutely
Well,
essential.
leaping ground, basically.
Exactly. Testing the rockets, testing the spacecraft systems, validating the procedures, gathering data, building confidence. Every piece had to work and work reliably before you put human lives on the line.
So what were some of the key early tests? I remember Apollo 4 being a big one.
Apollo 4, November 67. That was huge. It was the very first launch of the full Saturn V rocket. The whole thing, all 3 stages live. They called it an all-up test, which was itself a bold decision, testing everything at once.
High stakes.
Immense stakes. And it worked beautifully. It proved the monster rocket could actually fly, could deliver the payload. A massive hurdle cleared.
Okay, Saturn V checks out. What about the lunar module?
Good question. That came next with Apollo 5, January 68. This was the first flight test of the LM, the lander. Uncrewed, launched on a smaller Saturn IB into Earth orbit.
Why Earth orbit?
To test its systems in the vacuum of space, specifically its engines, the descent engine for landing, the ascent engine for getting back up, they needed to make sure it could perform those critical maneuvers before sending it to the moon.
Makes sense. Testing its legs, so to speak.
Sort of, yeah. And then came Apollo 6 in April 68. This was the second flight of the Saturn V, again uncrewed. It was meant to be the final stress test, the final qualification of the whole system, rocket and spacecraft for crewed missions.
Did it go smoothly?
Not entirely. They had some problems, engine issues, vibrations. But despite the glitches, NASA ultimately decided the system was safe enough, or could be made safe enough, for astronauts. It was basically the green light, clearing the path for people to fly.
But that path wasn't smooth. Just before these big Saturn V tests in early 67, the program faced an absolute tragedy, Apollo 1.
Yeah. January 27, 1967. A truly dark day for NASA and the country. It wasn't even a launch attempt. It was a ground test, a plugged-out test on the launch pad at Cape Kennedy for what would have been the first crewed mission, Apollo 204.
What happened?
A fire broke out inside the command module. It was pressurized with pure oxygen, which made the fire spread incredibly rapidly, almost instantly. The crew veteran Gus Grissom, Ed White, the first American to walk in space, and rookie Roger Chaffee, they couldn't get the hatch open in time.
Just devastating.
Absolutely devastating. It shook the program to its core. Everything stopped. There was a full investigation, a total reevaluation of the spacecraft design, the materials used, the procedures, everything.
So how did they move forward from something like that? Did it change things fundamentally?
Profoundly. The investigation led to major safety improvements. They redesigned the command module hatch so it could open outwards in seconds. They replaced flammable materials inside the cabin. They changed the procedures, especially regarding that pure oxygen environment on the ground.
So the tragedy, horrible as it was, ultimately made the later missions safer.
Without a doubt, it forced a hard look at safety culture. As the accounts like Remembering Apollo 1 detail, the lessons learned were baked into the program going forward. It was a terrible price to pay, but the sacrifice of Grissom, White, and Chaffee wasn't in vain. It directly contributed to the safety of the astronauts who eventually flew.
A tough lesson, but a vital one. So after the redesigns and the renewed focus on safety, they were ready to try again with crew.
Yes, the program regrouped, And in October 1968 came Apollo 7, Wally Schirra, Don Eisel, Walter Cunningham. This was the first crewed mission of the Apollo program.
Back in space after the fire.
Back in space. A 10-day mission in Earth orbit. The main goal was to wring out the redesigned command and service module, prove it was safe and reliable for the crew. It performed almost flawlessly. A huge confidence booster.
And then just a couple of months later, December 68, they did something incredibly bold with Apollo 8.
Apollo 8 was audacious. Frank Borman, Jim Lovell, Bill Anders. Originally, it was planned as another Earth orbit test, maybe testing the LM, but the LM wasn't quite ready, and there were intelligence reports the Soviets might be planning their own circumlunar flight.
So they changed the plan.
Dramatically. They decided to send Apollo 8 all the way to the moon without the LM, just the CSM on top of the mighty Saturn V, which had only flown twice before, uncrewed.
Wow, that's gutsy.
Incredibly gutsy. They became the first humans to leave Earth orbit, the first to see the far side of the moon, the first to witness Earthrise from lunar orbit. They orbited the moon 10 times.
That famous Earthrise photo?
Exactly. And their Christmas Eve broadcast, reading from Genesis while orbiting the moon. It was this profound unifying moment for the whole world. Apollo 8 really captured the imagination and showed the U.S. was making huge strides.
Okay, so humans have orbited the moon. What's next? Testing the lander with crew.
Precisely. That was Apollo 9, March 1969. Jim McDivitt, Dave Scott, Rusty Schweickart. This mission stayed in Earth orbit, but it flew the full Apollo spacecraft CSM and LM together for the first time with the crew.
Testing all the pieces together.
Right. They practiced separating the LM from the CSM, flying it independently, simulating the rendezvous and docking maneuvers that would be critical at the moon. Schweickart also did a spacewalk in the lunar spacesuit to test it out, proving the LM worked, proving astronauts could move between the vehicles. Absolutely vital steps.
One final check before the actual landing attempt.
That was Apollo 10, May 1969. Tom Stafford, John Young, Gene Cernan. This was the full dress rehearsal. They flew all the way to the moon, CSM and LM. Stafford and Cernan flew the LM, nicknamed Snoopy, down to within just 9 miles, about 15 kilometers of the lunar surface.
So close.
Agonizingly close. They tested everything, navigation, communications, radar, engine burns, everything except the final touchdown. They scouted the landing site for Apollo 11. It was the final confirmation that all systems were go for landing. The stage was set.
And then July 1969, Apollo 11, the big one.
The one everyone remembers. Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, Michael Collins. Launched July 16th. 4 days later, July 20th. History.
Armstrong and Aldrin in the lunar module, Eagle. Collins orbiting above in the command module, Columbia.
And that landing. It wasn't completely straightforward, was it?
No. Armstrong had to take manual control in the final moments. The computer was guiding them towards a boulder field. He had to fly it like a helicopter, searching for a safe spot, with fuel running dangerously low.
Nail-biting stuff. Talk about grace under pressure.
Absolutely. And then those famous words as he stepped onto the Sea of Tranquility. That's one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind.
A moment watched by hundreds of millions, maybe billions around the world. It just changed everything. As the historical records emphasize, it fulfilled that Kennedy challenge, demonstrated U.S. capability, and just inspired awe.
Just a few months later, they did it again. Apollo 12, November 69.
Right. Pete Conrad, Dick Gordon, Alan Bean, the second lunar landing. And what was significant here was the precision. They landed exactly where they intended to, right near the Surveyor 3 robotic probe that had landed 2.5 years earlier.
So they could walk over and check it out.
Yep. They retrieved parts from Surveyor to bring back to Earth to see how materials fared on the moon. It proved they could target specific locations, which was crucial for future scientific exploration.
Okay, 2 successful landings. Then came Apollo 13 in April 1970, and this one almost ended in disaster.
Apollo 13, the successful failure, as it's often called. Jim Lovell, Jack Swigert, Fred Haise. About 2 days into the mission, on the way to the moon, disaster struck.
An explosion.
An oxygen tank in the service module exploded. It crippled the CSM, knocking out most of its power and oxygen. The lunar landing was instantly aborted. The mission became purely about survival, getting the crew home alive.
And the whole world was watching this unfold.
Absolutely glued to their radios and TVs. It was this incredible drama playing out in real time. The crew had to shut down the command module and use the lunar module, which was undamaged, as a lifeboat.
Using a ship designed for 2 people on the moon to support 3 all the way back to Earth.
Exactly. They faced freezing temperatures, shortage of water, rising carbon dioxide levels. Mission Control in Houston worked around the clock, improvising procedures, figuring out navigation, conserving power. That famous scene of them building a CO2 scrubber out of spare parts, that really
That's
happened.
just incredible ingenuity from both the crew and the ground team.
A testament to human problem solving under the most extreme pressure imaginable. And against all odds, they made it. They looped around the moon and safely splashed down back on Earth. It was seen as one of NASA's finest hours, paradoxically.
Wow. After that drama, they got back to landing missions.
They did. Apollo 14 launched in January 71. Alan Shepard, Stu Roosa, Edgar Mitchell. They landed in the Fra Mauro region, the site originally planned for Apollo 13.
And Alan Shepard, he was one of the original Mercury astronauts, right?
He was the first American in space. It was amazing he'd been grounded for years due to an inner ear disorder, had surgery, and got back to flight status to command the moon mission. Became the 5th person and the oldest at the time to walk on the moon. He even hit a couple of golf balls up there.
Classic. Okay, and Apollo 15, July 71, what was new here?
Apollo 15 marked a big shift towards more extensive scientific exploration. Dave Scott, Al Worden, Jim Irwin. This was the first of the J missions designed for longer stays on the moon and more science. And the big innovation,
The moon buggy.
the Lunar Roving Vehicle, the LRV. For the first time, astronauts could drive on the moon. This dramatically increased their range. They could travel miles from the LM, explore different geological features, collect a wider variety of samples. Scott and Irwin spent 3 days on the surface, covering almost 18 miles.
A game changer for exploration.
Totally. Apollo 16, April 72, continued this trend. John Young, Ken Mattingly, Charlie Duke. They landed in the Descartes Highlands, another geologically interesting area. They also had an LRV and conducted extensive surveys. John Young, by the way, ended up being the only person to fly on Gemini, Apollo, and the Space Shuttle.
Quite a career. And that brings us to the final mission, Apollo 17.
Apollo 17, December 1972. Gene Cernan, Ron Evans, Harrison Schmitt. This was the last time humans walked on the moon, at least in the 20th century. Cernan, the commander, holds the distinction of being the last man to walk on the moon.
And this mission had a special scientific focus, didn't it?
It really did. Harrison Jack Schmitt was a professional geologist, the only scientist to walk on the moon during Apollo. He brought an expert eye to the exploration of the Taurus-Littrow Valley. They stayed even longer, conducted more experiments, and brought back a record haul of lunar samples over 110 kilograms.
A strong scientific finish to the program.
Absolutely. It really emphasized the scientific return of Apollo, leaving a rich legacy of data and samples that scientists are still studying today. Cernan's final words as he left the surface were a promise that humankind would return.
So Apollo 17 marks the end of the landings, December 1972. An incredible run, just over 3 years from the first landing to the last. But the program itself officially concluded then. Why did it end, especially after building all that capability?
Yeah, it's a question that comes up a lot. The sources we've looked at mostly focus on the program's execution and achievements,
Right.
rather than deep dives into the reasons for its conclusion. But broadly speaking, it had achieved its primary goal, Kennedy's challenge.
Beat the Soviets, land on the moon before the decade was out. Check.
Check. And, these missions were incredibly expensive. National priorities began to shift. The intense Cold War pressure that fueled its start had eased somewhat. There were other things competing for budget and attention social programs, the Vietnam War. The political will, perhaps, wasn't as laser-focused as it had been in the 60s.
So a combination of factors. Mission accomplished, cost, changing times.
Pretty much.
Mhm.
It wasn't a sudden cancellation out of nowhere. The later missions, Apollos 18, 19, 20, had already been canceled earlier due to budget cuts. Apollo 17 was known to be the finale for that era. So it wasn't the end of Apollo's influence, just the end of the active lunar missions for that period.
Right, and that influence, that legacy, it's immense, isn't it? Let's talk about the science first. One of the main goals was scientific exploration of the moon. How did it deliver?
Oh, spectacularly. The sheer amount of material brought back 382 kilos, over 840 pounds of rocks, soil, core samples from 6 very different locations. It completely revolutionized our understanding of the moon.
And we're still studying those samples.
Absolutely. Decades later, new instruments, new techniques reveal things they couldn't possibly have seen back then. There are samples that were deliberately kept pristine, unopened, waiting for future technology.
Huh.
Resources like NASA's Astromaterials 3D website let anyone virtually explore these samples now.
That's amazing.
And institutions like the Lunar and Planetary Institute, founded during Apollo in '68, are still hubs for this research. The scientific return was, and continues to be, enormous. We learned about the moon's age, its composition, its violent formation history, likely from a giant impact with early Earth.
And the technology side, that goal of establishing technology to meet other national interests.
Another huge legacy. Think about it.
Yeah.
The Saturn V technology pushed large rocket development forward immensely. The rendezvous and docking techniques pioneered are fundamental to space station operations today.
Like support, computing.
Exactly. Miniaturized computers for guidance. The Apollo guidance computer was state-of-the-art, driving forward integrated circuits. Fuel cells for power, advanced materials, insulation techniques. So many innovations developed for Apollo found their way into other areas.
The famous spin-offs.
The spin-offs, yeah. Things we take for granted now, from medical imaging advancements derived from digital signal processing used for lunar images, to cordless tools, even fire-resistant materials used by firefighters. Many trace roots back to the needs of the Apollo program. It was a massive technological incubator.
And what about the human side? Developing human capability to work in the lunar environment. What did we learn there?
We learned humans could do it. The 12 astronauts who walked on the moon, the others who flew the missions, they gained unprecedented operational experience in deep space.
Armstrong, Aldrin, Shepard, Cernan, Schmidt.
All of them. And not just the astronauts, but the massive teams on the ground. Mission Control developing procedures for complex operations for handling emergencies like Apollo 13. That knowledge base documented in things like the flight journals and lunar surface journals is invaluable.
So it built expertise for future spaceflight.
Absolutely. How to plan long-duration missions, how to train crews, how to manage complex systems far from Earth, how to solve problems on the fly. All fundamental for Skylab, the shuttle, the ISS, and whatever comes next, like Artemis missions back to the moon and eventually Mars.
And maybe the biggest legacy, the cultural impact, that giant leap for mankind idea.
It's hard to overstate. It really did feel like a unifying moment for humanity, fulfilling that ancient dream. It fundamentally changed our perspective, showing our home planet as this beautiful, fragile oasis from afar, the overview effect they talk about.
And it certainly achieved that goal of preeminence for the U.S. at the time.
Symbolically, yes. It was a powerful demonstration of what a nation could achieve when focused on a goal. The images, the stories, they became part of global culture.
And that fascination clearly lasts. People are still captivated by Apollo.
Look at all the documentaries, books, the continued analysis, the NASA archives, the historical analyses mentioned in our sources. There's a deep, enduring interest. It speaks to something fundamental about exploration and pushing boundaries.
And it keeps inspiring new generations, right? The educational legacy.
Definitely. Schools still use Apollo as a prime example of STEM achievement: science, technology, engineering, math. There are resources for educators, even 3D printing models of landing sites and spacecraft. It continues to fuel that spark of curiosity, encouraging kids to look up and wonder what's next.
What a journey. From the Cold War pressure cooker and Kennedy's Challenge, through building these incredible machines against the clock.
To those first tentative uncrewed tests, overcoming the Apollo 1 tragedy, the boldness of Apollo 8, the sheer triumph and terror of the landings themselves.
Yeah, Apollo 11's success, Apollo 13's rescue, growing science focus with the later missions and the rover. It really was an epic saga.
An audacious quest, truly. Executed with just incredible engineering, unbelievable human courage, and that relentless problem-solving spirit.
And as we've unpacked, the impact goes so far beyond just those boot prints in the lunar dust. It reshaped science, it accelerated technology in ways we still feel today.
And it fundamentally expanded our sense of human capability, our place in the cosmos. It proved that when we commit to something truly ambitious, even the seemingly impossible can be achieved.
It really did change our world and how we see it.
Which kind of leaves us with a big question, doesn't it? As you reflect on the Apollo program, this absolutely monumental achievement that stretched human imagination and ability to the limit.
Yeah.
What do you think is the next giant leap humanity is destined to make? And maybe more importantly, what is it that drives us, fundamentally, to keep reaching for those leaps?